I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story and welcome to Friday. Glad you're here. Glad you're with us. At the end of many of our segments, we tell you that we're going to follow something up down the road and get back to you. Well, tonight, that's exactly what we're doing. We're bringing you an update on a story about botched renovations at a Portland high school. $240 million was spent to give McDaniel High School a makeover, both inside and out. But now there's a problem, and it's not going to be cheap to fix. Let's get everyone caught up with a portion of that original story from investigative reporter Kyle Iboshi.
1, 2, 3, Melee!
It's game day, and McDaniel High School is on the road facing Ida B. Wells. But for McDaniel, every game is an away game. 2 years after a multi-million-dollar renovation at the Portland High School, the softball team can't use their own field for games. They've got to play elsewhere.
We have to go off campus, and those get called home games, but they're not at home.
And baseball is in the same position. Instead of playing on a new turf field just steps from their own high school, players and their parents have to travel across town for home games.
You know, it was like, wow, we get a new field. It's so exciting. And it's been a bummer the last 2 years.
It's incredibly frustrating. It's just sitting there.
In September of 2021, Portland Public Schools celebrated the reopening of McDaniel High School. The roughly $240 million renovation included new theaters, common areas, and athletic fields. But at some point, it's not clear when, the district realized there was a flaw in the baseball and softball fields, making them unusable for games. In an email to KGW last year, the assistant athletics director explained, the issue is lack of a protective padded wall or cyclone fence in front of a short cement retaining wall. In essence, it was a safety issue. But 1 year later, it sounds like there's more. In a letter to the community, the district wrote, unfortunately, the new netting does not allow baseballs to bounce off the netting and remain in play, thus effectively shortening the length of the field and making it unusable for league games. To fix the problem, the district plans to install custom steel poles that will hold up new tension net and some protective padding, the letter explained.
Wouldn't they know how to build a field correctly? So was that contractor paid? Where's that contractor? Are they paying for their mistake?
Many parents, frustrated by delays, feel the district is giving them the runaround.
No real good answers as to why the problem hasn't been solved yet.
Kyle joins me now, and we told people that we would follow up after your initial story, so I'm so glad we're doing this. But some big questions. Who's going to pay and how much?
It's not cheap, $750,000. We found that out through the contract, which we obtained through a public records request. It basically says a Washington company will come in, replace the newly installed poles and netting at a cost of about $750,000.
Wow. And are taxpayers going to foot the bill?
Yeah, good question. I asked the district this. They said it won't impact any other programs, any other funds. This all comes from the bonds that were used to pay for the modernization of McDaniel High School.
So they had an extra $750,000 just sitting around.
Good question.
Yeah, a little skeptical on that. All right, and how long is it going to take? Well, before we get to that, why not make the contractor or the architect pay?
Yeah, the big question is kind of who's to blame here. And I don't know that you can pin this on one person or group or company, really. In looking through all the records, you had an architecture firm that designed it. It had to get approval from both the city and also the district who signed off on it. In looking at those original design plans, you can clearly see their illustrations and even photos of and examples of the poles and the netting that were planned here. So nobody was really caught off guard. Ultimately, in my opinion, after having looked at all this, it wasn't until players were on the field and they kind of evaluated, this really isn't going to work, that they recognized we've got a problem here and it's not usable.
Wow. Okay. So the fix then, how long is that going to take? It's been 2 years.
It has. It's been a very slow process, obviously very frustrating for those players and also the parents that have not been able to use this brand new field for 2 years now. The district tells me this company will start work in late July. It should take about 2 weeks. When it's all said and done, hopefully by about mid-August, they're done, so they'll be able to use it for next softball and baseball season. So why has it taken so long? Great question. They had an initial contractor. That contractor apparently pulled out. Then you brought in this new contractor. There were workforce staffing related issues and also supply chain issues. They say this slowed things down even more because they hope to have it done in May. Now here we are, and it's continuing to drag on.
Wow. Let's hope this new timeline really is hit.
Yeah.
Thanks for keeping the light on this, too. Appreciate the follow-up. Now let's talk about the climate. Oregon and the rest of the Pacific Northwest do have ambitious goals. Our state has pledged to cut emissions by 80% by 2050. But a new report lays out a path for the entire region to go even further, all the way to net zero emissions in that same time frame. Environmental reporter Kyle Williams talked to one of the authors of that report, and he joins us with that story.
Our region really could be a proving ground on how to achieve net zero. And I think we're poised to lead on decarbonization.
That's Eileen V. Quigley, founder and executive director of the Clean Energy Transition Institute. Her organization recently released a new analysis of how the Pacific Northwest could lead the way as the world looks to transition away from fossil fuels. She said one thing that sets us apart from the rest of the nation, we already get a sizable chunk of our energy from renewable sources like wind, solar, and hydropower.
And so we have to focus on the harder to decarbonize sectors sooner. And we have to focus on transportation and buildings in terms of the sectoral emissions.
That means developing clean fuels, like hydrogen, to use in parts of the economy that are hard to electrify, things like boats, planes, and heavy industry.
Those are all strategies that every state and country that's working on decarbonization is going to need, but we just need them sooner.
Now, Quigley envisions a future where resources are shared across the West, with solar coming from the Southwest, wind power coming from Montana and Wyoming, and hydropower coming from our region.
These would all be on the grid at various times during the day, during the year. They'd be supporting a wide range of technologies that would be providing clean electricity or making fuels to power a much broader set of uses than what we currently use today.
There are, of course, big challenges to overcome. New transmission lines, which currently take decades to get approved and frequently face opposition, will be needed across vast areas of the West. Developers and regulators will need to walk a fine line, speeding up that process while still listening and responding to the concerns of residents.
So rural, coastal, tribal community members need to be at the table to make the decisions about what will work for them when it comes to renewable energy development and transmission expansion.
A full transition to net zero will also come with a massive jump in demand for electricity. Quigley's analysis found that the need for electric power will more than double by 2050. But overall demand for energy, that will actually fall by roughly 30%.
And that's because electricity is inherently much more efficient than fossil fuels.
Despite the challenges, Quigley said there is a path forward. And the Pacific Northwest, we're well positioned to lead the way.
I see so much activity in so many different quarters, all pointing in the right direction, and the economic shifting. So that's what gives me hope.
And Kale's with me now. So how's this work? Electricity goes way up, but energy demand only goes up a certain amount?
Yeah, so you have to imagine that, electric vehicles, heat pumps, electric stoves are a lot more efficient than those same appliances run on fossil fuels. So if you have an electric vehicle and you want to go a mile, say it takes 10 units of energy to do that with gasoline, it only takes 7 if you're on an electric car. And so that's how you get your 30% savings.
Huh. Okay, interesting. And this idea of these transmission lines, I mean, it's one thing to say, but that's a huge undertaking. How realistic is it?
That remains to be seen. I have reported on these lines myself, as I know that you have too. And there is always opposition from people that live in these communities. So it's going to be a really tall ask to somehow speed up the permitting process while still remaining responsive and attentive to the people in these communities who don't necessarily want these things there.
Yeah, and there's a reason that it takes so long now.
There is. I mean, it takes a lot of permitting, a lot of siting. You've got to have meetings. You've got to go through all these different agencies, federal, state, county, city. And these things are just kind of a behemoth of a bureaucracy.
Yeah. And at the same time, it is needed if we're going to meet those goals. Be fascinating to see how that works out.
Yeah. You and I will both be paying attention.
Yes, we will. Thank you, Kale. Appreciate it. Great stuff.
My pleasure.
Up next on The Story.
And I don't believe it will until we can get a white, hot spotlight shown on the whole body donation industry.
A follow-up to our previous reports on body brokers, people selling body parts for profit. A woman's body ended up in the Arizona desert after her family thought it was donated for research at the University of Washington. Now there's been a federal criminal investigation into the morgue manager at Harvard for body broker activities. The families in the Pacific Northwest are sounding off. That's next when The Story returns. A manager at one of the world's most prestigious medical schools has been charged with a federal crime. He's accused of selling human body parts donated to Harvard Medical School on the black market. It's the latest example of abuse in the unregulated body donation industry. It has spurred the family of one victim in a criminal case here in the Northwest to speak out about it for the first time. We do want to warn you, this story includes images that may disturb some viewers. Here's Chris Ingalls with the story.
She was the wife of an Army soldier stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord when she learned she would not survive her battle with a rare cancer. Amanda West was 32 years old when she died in February of 2019.
Parents are not supposed to outlive their children.
Her father, David Griffin, who spoke with us from his home in Oklahoma, says even in her grief, Amanda wanted to give back.
She saw this as her obviously last chance to help out her fellow man.
Amanda filled out the paperwork to donate her body after her death to the University of Washington Medical School.
She was clearly under the impression that they were going to use her body for research.
But donated cadavers don't always end up where the donors intended, as seen earlier this month in Boston.
What do you have to say about these charges, sir? This is your chance to speak.
The FBI arrested Cedric Lodge, the morgue manager for Harvard University's willed body program, in a multi-state investigation into the sale of human body parts. He's one of several defendants accused of fueling the macabre, profitable trade of bones, brains, and skin. Why did you want to speak now?
I would say that this is not a one-off or small thing. This is a widespread problem.
Griffin believes this because of what happened to Amanda's remains after she died. They ended up in the hands of a private, for-profit body broker named Walter Mitchell. In 2020, Mitchell transported the remains of 10 Washington state donors, including Amanda, to Arizona, where he dumped them near Prescott.
Mr. Mitchell took her final wish and threw it out.
Walter Mitchell was sentenced to 6 years in prison last year.
Family coming up, that hurts. That hurt me. And I take responsibility for what I did.
Private body brokers do provide human remains to medical and research companies for legitimate purposes. But the criminal case raised unanswered questions about Mitchell's handling of donations. How did Amanda's body end up with Mitchell? When her parents called the University of Washington hotline to report Amanda's death, her donation was unexpectedly rejected, and an alternative, Walter Mitchell, was suggested.
I thought that this person, whoever was on the other line of the phone, was with UW, and we thought that, they were recommending this, so he must be a legitimate guy, and it must be a legitimate business.
The University of Washington's willed body program blamed a contractor for referring rejected donors to Mitchell. But either way, Mitchell had a pipeline into the Northwest's most distinguished medical school. The University of Washington has a duty to protect donors from brokers like Mitchell, according to donor families.
I'm more disappointed in the University of Washington Medical School than I am with Walter Mitchell.
Evans Wilson's mother, Maudine, was another donor rejected by the University of Washington. A DNA test ultimately determined that she was not among the remains in Arizona. The Wilson family wonders what really did happen to her remains and blames the UW for connecting them with Mitchell.
Because they've basically denied any responsibility for any of this.
He loved his dog Beetle very much.
A similar reaction from the family of Douglas Patterson, rejected by the UW and referred to Mitchell.
For the University of Washington, who is like a respected, medical school, for them to be so careless, I don't get it.
Other renowned universities like UCLA, George Washington, and the University of Texas have been rocked by scandals in their willed body programs. There's clearly a lack of regulation, says David Griffin.
I do feel like that needs to change, and I don't believe it will until we can get a white, hot spotlight shown on the whole body donation industry or system.
That was Chris Ingalls. That father is calling for increased regulation of the industry, and following the Harvard case, that might just happen. Bills have been filed in both chambers of Congress to empower the Department of Health and Human Services to handle licensing and regulation of body donation industry. And though that sounds good, bills like this have been introduced before and then died in the face of really fierce opposition. It's worth noting the man in the story who was sentenced to 6 years in prison for the Washington case, Walter Mitchell, well, he had a felony record before all of that happened. But even then, he did not need a license to be a body broker. And there's no inspection required for universities or for-profit brokers, and no tracking of where the body donations go. In my opinion, regulation in that realm feels long overdue. But what do you think about it? More government oversight when it comes to body donation or not? Share your thoughts with us, will you? Email thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Coming up next on The Story, former President Donald Trump has been in the headlines for a variety of things lately. Indictments, investigations, his 2024 presidential bid, you name it. But wait till you hear this. The 45th president is also the victor in an election in Marion County, Oregon. Yep, you heard that right. Why the election was decided by rolling the dice and what happens now that Donald Trump has been declared the winner. Really, when The Story returns. Oregon has a new Secretary of State, LaVon Griffin-Valade. She was sworn in as the state's 29th Secretary of State this morning. You'll remember the 28th Secretary of State, Shemia Fagan, resigned amid a cloud of cannabis controversy. Griffin-Valade was appointed by Governor Tina Kotek to fill the remainder of Fagan's term. She said this morning that she was not expecting the job. The governor reached out to her about it. Griffin-Valade is a John Day native in Eastern Oregon, along with a long track record of ensuring accountability in government. Beginning in 1998, she spent 16 years as a government performance auditor, first in Multnomah County and then as the Portland City Auditor.
I know LaVon Griffin-Valade first and foremost from her experience holding government leaders accountable, her ethical judgment, and her reputation as a leader with a steady hand who rises above politics. I took my time, and after taking the time to evaluate this very critical decision, I feel strongly that LaVon Griffin-Valade is the right person to meet this moment and regain Oregonians' faith in their government.
Griffin Valade retired back in 2014 and has enjoyed a career as a writer, authoring the Maggie Blackthorne series, comprised of 4 mystery novels set in Eastern Oregon. But now she'll be back in the world of public service, and she's got a tough job ahead of her, making sure the Secretary of State's office is in good shape and rebuilding its reputation. She says she is ready.
I think my reputation is very helpful. I think that the fact that I'm a stranger to state government is very helpful. I'm going to rely on advisors, and I'm not very good at taking bad advice if I get it.
Well, that's good. Griffin Valade will serve the remaining 18 months of the current term, putting her in office through January 2025. As for running for the office after this current term is up, does not sound likely.
And do you plan on running for this office?
No.
Because?
I haven't given it another thought, or a thought.
That's pretty firm no. Moving on now. For many of you watching at home, this is just video of the former president, Donald Trump. And yep, that's correct, it is. But it also shows the man who just won an election in Western Oregon, beating out 4 other candidates to win a seat on the board of the tiny Hubbard Rural Fire Protection District. No kidding, I'm really not joking. It's not April 1st, this is real. We were first alerted to this story by our friends at the Statesman Journal newspaper, and we think their article is definitely worth your time. It was written by Bill Poehler and winds through the wild story of how the nation's 45th president secured what can only be described as an unlikely victory. Here's how it happened. In the May 16th election in Marion County, there were several seats open for the Hubbard Rural Fire Protection District. That covers 7 square miles between Woodburn and Aurora and serves about 5,000 people. In position number 3, no candidates filed to fill the seat. So voters were left to write in their own choice or just leave it blank. Of the 452 voters in that district who were eligible to vote for that position, only 25 actually wrote in their own candidate. 5 people received 2 write-in votes each, including former President Trump. And because the race was so close, it triggered an automatic recount, which we're guessing didn't take very long, and that confirmed the 5-way tie. So what is the tiebreaker? Well, it's a game of chance. And in this case, a roll of the dice. By the way, the Marion County Clerk says they've confirmed all of this with their own attorney and the Secretary of State's office because, as he put it to the Statesman Journal, it's been a while since they've had to do something like this. So check it out. Each of the write-in candidates had stand-ins roll for them. Mr. Trump certainly did not attend, and neither did the other 4. A 12-sided dice was used, and on the first roll, 3 candidates rolled a 10, including the stand-in for the former president. And in a way that's almost too fitting for a man who developed casinos, in the second round of rolling, Trump's stand-in rolled a 12, and it was not matched by the others, making Donald J. Trump the winner. So what happens next? Well, the fire district has to determine whether Trump is eligible to hold office. To do so, the candidate must own property or live in the district, which, to our knowledge, Trump does not do either. His primary residence, of course, is Mar-a-Lago in Florida. The Hubbard fire chief says if Trump cannot be confirmed to hold the office or want to hold the office, the other 2 candidates who rolled 10s in the first round of dice rolling will be asked if they're interested, and if they don't want it, a vacancy will be declared and the fire board will have to appoint someone. By the way, this is a 4-year term and it's not paid. Next steps will be determining during a fire board meeting on July 12th. And for what it's worth, former President Trump's campaign did not immediately respond to the Statesman Journal when they asked if he was interested in the position down there in Hubbard. We're guessing the answer is no, thank you. Well, that's it. That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, that never ends. Stick around now for the news at 6:30 and enjoy your weekend. I'll see you right back here on Monday.